Welcome to A Trek Within. I'm Rob Sullivan, and today I have a very special guest. Her name is Dr. Therese Rowley. And Therese is a really interesting person. She and I met a long time ago. She's a very gifted intuitive, and she's one of probably the only person I think I know in that space who has transitioned to doing not just one on one readings for people, but also working with companies, working with executives and helping them tap into their intuition. So we're going to explore a bit of both today. So welcome, Therese.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Rob. It's been a while.
Hey, nice to see you. Yeah, thank you for coming. This is great. Uh, so the first thing, let's just start at the beginning. You and I have known each other for a long time. Our dear friend Jackie Hart, it made the introduction, and actually, it was one of those things. I really felt like I was supposed to meet you because she had told me about you, and then I think I'd heard about you from somebody else, and it was just one of the. It just came together beautifully. Uh, when did you first recognize that you had gifts and that you could do things that the average person could not?
Uh, I always think of myself as sort of an average person, so I have to rethink the way that you said that. I'm an average person in that, I'm from the south side of Chicago with 10 brothers and sisters, not the biggest family on the block, and we had to be pretty normal to be on, who we were. So, and I still have this wonderful community of family. But when it comes to these gifts, really it was my desire to be with my mother because of all the kids, alone with her, and we ended up she goes to mass every morning, I think, to keep her sanity with raising 11 children. And I went with her. And as soon as I went into mass, I realized that I felt at home. And I began to uh, find that for me, prayer and meditation also felt like home, and it felt easy. And I felt like over the years, I kept thinking, this feels so familiar. Now, if I were in this stage of my life, I might say, sounds like maybe a past life or a parallel life or something, because a child of 6 or 7 years old shouldn't feel familiar when they walk into something with no experience to back that up. But for years, I was really in a space where some would call mystic, and some would call like near-death experiences, taken out of body. But it was really an opportunity to see how we're all connected in the light. And I was really having conversations there about what is it like to be a human being in this on earth, and what can you do as a spirit through this human expression. And I was given kind of disciplines to see without having data, to be able to see through things, to be able to know things without knowing why, to trust myself and what came to me without really having to own the outcome or even be involved in the outcome, to know that what I was meant to do in that moment and contribute was enough. That's a big deal for, I think, all of us. Are we enough? Am I enough? Have I done enough? And so there was a lot of that kind of training for about 20 years. So that's how I first realized I had a gift. And then when the lights went out, and I call it lights went out, some people call it dark night of the soul. It was kind of like, well, wait a minute. I don't know what I know anymore. I can't see through things. I can't see things. But I always had a guide, and suddenly it felt like the guide was gone. So I studied over 50 different kinds of healing modalities in order to learn what was going on with me. I ended up in Boulder, Colorado, and in California, and having these very interesting experiences of having feeling like I was having channeling experiences or energy coming through me. And I thought, what is this? I have no idea. So I studied it. I'm like, what's going on with me? And it got me to a place of being able to bridge from the spiritual to the more human in a way that helps people to make that translation and befriend their body and befriend spirit. And what is that? What is it to cross the bridge in either direction in a familiar and safe way, an emotionally safe way? And so I studied that. Even as I was always in business, I was always doing that on the side because I couldn't help it. So a long-winded answer to a short question.
No, it's great though. I love it because I'm all about detail. So one of the things that I always wonder about is, when you were younger and you were first, feeling at home in church and whatnot, how did your family respond, and how much did they actually even know about what was going on with you?
Great question. when I was at mass, I would even see spirits, I would hear spirits, and I was told by spirit not to tell anyone. I think they would have put me in a jacket backwards, and I think that spirit was aware of that and loved me enough to say, let's not tell them. And so I spend a lot of time applying spiritual disciplines in my life, things like detachment, things like, oh, I
Mhm.
want that, but let that person have it, little things. But the little things are the most meaningful. And so it's little thing after little thing, but I really never told anybody because clearly there is a certain kind of relationship portal that some people have to the divine that's different than other people. And some people are more pragmatic and realist, and they are very clear about their boundaries. And other people are more unbounded, free spirited, connected to ideas and innovation, and they don't get into the structure. So I was clear I was B, and I had to become A because I had 10 brothers and sisters and a lot to do at home. And there wasn't a choice about that. So that's how I first started to build the bridge between both sides of my brain. Otherwise, I would have been, out there floating in the ozone sideways. Uh, but I came back in.
Interesting. So there was so much that you said as you were describing your early journey. What, if anything, do you remember as the trigger that ended that dark night of the soul?
That ended it.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of waiting for that. It ended it. So any day now. Yeah, I remember when Gandhi's wife was interviewed, and they said to her, we understand that when your husband was like in his early 30s or something, he decided not to have, intimate marital relations anymore. They said, what's that like for you? And she was in her 80s. She said, well, there's still time. You never know when things will come back. So sometimes it feels like that. But I think what's happened is it was an evolution of spirit rather than a did I ever get to return? I think that Bono said that wisdom is the reclamation of innocence at the far side of experience. And I think that's kind of what it is. It's that you have an innocence and then you bump into life and life bumps into you. And that gets very rocky to learn about life through the topography of the rocks and everything. And then you reclaim some of that essence and innocence that you started with, but it's very well informed at the far side of experience. So I think it's more of an evolution than it is getting back to where I was.
Interesting. And you may be the only person I know who is capable of bringing Bono and Gandhi into the same answer. So thank you for that. Love it. So, when did you start working with individuals in helping them tap into spirit?
Well, it's interesting because I think that it was in my nature to see what was happening in a dynamic for someone, whether it was them talking about a relationship with someone or it was a situation they were having and they were wrestling with themselves. I I've always been able to see. So what I see as in see through things into the essence or into the heart of the matter. And so I was doing that even in college. People mostly talked to me when they were in crisis or terrible transition. Not to if you have a crisis in the room, don't talk to me. I'll just get upset and it'll make things worse. But afterwards, if you're trying to make meaning of it, or you're trying to say, why did that happen? And why, and is it possible to fix this relationship? And how is that going on? I could always see how another person was perceiving and how both people were perceiving and why the connection between them wasn't in common. And so to bring up that elucidate that connection and to help both people see the other differently allowed for an easier connection and reconnection, but maybe again in a more informed way, which is the point of evolution. So I did that, all throughout my life. And then I started doing, it was when I was in my 20s, I couldn't help but start to feel that there was energy I could see. And I did take some meditation classes and I began to understand that some people knew about this stuff that I didn't. For me, energy work is really spiritual. It's really spirit expressing itself through me and through everyone in their own unique way. For some people, this is about being psychic and cool and being able to know stuff. But for me, I feel like a mystic with psychic symptoms. I have a relationship in spirit, and it happens to show up that it looks psychic, but it's very much at a soul level that I've always perceived, and so I can now connect with the essence of somebody's purpose and look at what wants to happen, what wants to emerge, and then be able to call that, evoke it, and to be able to play it back to someone for resonance to say, is this what you feel? And after 14,000 readings or so, most people say yes, fortunately. And so, yeah, so I started out in my 20s, maybe.
That's amazing. Well, and just, for background, one of the stories that I share in the book, A Trek Within, is I think it was my first reading with you because I've had about three of them over the years. And I very vividly remember I didn't give you any, even though you and I had met before, I purposely didn't give you any sort of clue. I just went in and said, and you said, what do you want to tune in on? And I said, well, let's check in on business. And you knew that I had a book and you knew that I was a speaker and stuff. And I wasn't obviously trying to hide any of that. But what you didn't know was that I was massively spinning my wheels and not really getting anywhere. And you wouldn't have had any way of knowing that. And I still remember when you tuned in and you started describing, I think it was like a scuba diver, pulling, barnacles off a ship or something. And you said you're working at a level of detail that is just way beyond anything that's helpful to you. And then you started going back and said, let's figure out where this is coming from. And it was really an amazing journey through the whole thing. And I still remember how you then ultimately hit on the fact that I had had a life as a soldier in a Nazi-like regime. And I had ended that life and decided, you know what, I don't want to do that anymore. There was a lot of detail about that had come up about, my family of origin, and I didn't really have a choice, and how I ended up just being more of a rule follower, but following the rules ultimately got me promoted and made me more and more responsible for things. And I'm never doing that again. And my next lifetimes are all going to be in service of humanity without expectation of earthly reward. And that was the bottom line that you had uncovered. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, well, that would certainly, account for not making any financial progress in this lifetime. But what I loved about the reading then was that you went in and you said, let's look at whether it's a vow or an agreement. And I would definitely want you to talk about that a bit, because we determined it was a vow and we worked on it and cleared it all in one session. Not like the, charlatans of the world who are going to say, oh, you're going to need to buy candles and I'll pray for you for 3 weeks. There was none of that. It was all, you were very no nonsense. Let's get it done, clear it out. And it cleared out. And people may have, there's more detail about it in the book, but it was a really powerful experience that ended with a dream a week later. And my career took off after that. I didn't have that spinning of wheels anymore. And there was nothing else that was different, which was amazing to me. So talk to me about, there's a lot there, but I wanted, for the benefit of the people who don't know, really much about either one of us in some cases, and certainly don't know that story about me. How do you do that? And the vow and the agreement and all those things, those are just that's probably not in the average person's vocabulary. So talk about that a bit.
Yeah, that's why I created a methodology for reading and healing in the quantum field that I've been teaching some people to read as I read, because every one of us is always reading energy. And I just happen to have been doing it so long that it's become some of the elements that I use have become persistent and consistent. And I see that they work over time. So I offer it as an opportunity for others to find out, how do they know what they know, and how can they dive into that knowing in a way that illuminates for them where that persistent stuckness is for themselves, and realign so that it's aligned with what they want. And what I've done in my own book, Mapping a New Reality, Discovering Intuitive Intelligence, is talk about the elements of the map of reality that we all use. And when we find persistent challenges in our life that become themes or motifs, oftentimes that's because we are being loyal to a belief system that was born in some story that remains with us. Some people call those stories past life. Some people call them parallel lives. Some people call them archetypes. Some people call them collective unconscious. I call them your truth wrapped in a story, because I don't care. It's basically that, if quantum physics tells us there's no time and space, then how do we have a past life? But we also have, through string theory, there's a mathematical basis to saying there's at least seven or more dimensional realities going on simultaneously. So we may say that we're connected to some of those, but in some ways, I've learned over the years of the decades of doing this that we are connected to a series of stories that illuminate very particular themes. And we have to believe, what I've come to is that there's a worldview that I have that has to be embraced in order for any of it to make sense. And that worldview is very simply that we're all brilliant spirits of light who've decided to don this human costume to learn about love through the lens of polarities. Separation and unity, or fear and love. And the fact that we think we're human when physics also tells us that we're just vibrating light already says that we've decided we're going to call ourselves separate from the light. So that's already learning in polarity by definition. And then we take qualities. I see people looking at things like dependence, independence, responsibility, irresponsibility, and they're trying to bring these opposites into paradox to say both and. So for a caregiver who says, no, you're more important than I am. I don't really count. My feelings don't count. Yours count. I'm going to use my feelings to understand how you feel so I can help you more. Well, then I ignore myself. So that person is studying what does love look like through the self-sacrifice of, not counting myself, but counting you. What's in the middle of that is honoring myself as I serve you in love. That's the middle ground that they're working on. So in business terms, we want to operationalize that self-honoring so that people know how to balance those two aspects when they come into that place of knowing. And so how do I do that? So I'm looking at where is a story in your field where, look, the story's only in your field for two reasons. I see a story if it illuminates a gift that you have and helps to describe it better. If you have a gift and I can say, for example, well, you're a surgeon in this lifetime and you're really interested in how you can stitch up some of these little parts of a person that are, torn. And then in the next lifetime, you're a lace maker and you're really concerned about how you put that lace together. It's the same skill. It's just different applications. And in this lifetime, you happen to be applying it a different way, right? And they might not even tell me how, but later they'll say that's very much what I do in this life. So, or the skill is. The second reason why it's in your field is because there's a fear-based belief, let's say, that was born in that lifetime. That's how I say it. Well, what does that mean? It means that you had an experience, you came to the conclusion, you blamed yourself for something, and you found yourself not worthy of forgiveness. And when that happens, you go on a karmic journey and you say, I'm going to make up for this. I'm never going to let that happen again. And then you also try to control outcomes. Like nobody's going to die on my watch because I'm going to do this so well. So you go into these other stories or lifetimes and you're working really hard on these parts that will pay back and show that and stop that outcome from happening. And then you get to a reading and it gives you the opportunity to take a look at all of these things and say, look at what you've learned in love through this lens of this side of the polarity. Perhaps this is complete. And can we be complete with the lessons we've learned at a soul level? Yes, we can. So I create a process where we just, let's say, a small visualization that we release those belief systems, and then we create a positive, provocative belief system to replace it. When we're talking about whether it's a vow or whether it's an agreement, if it's I can see in a field if something is very sticky. It's dense and I try to move it and it's impressively stubborn. And I'm like, okay, that's impressively stubborn. I invited that to move. It said, I don't think so. I tried again with a nice little addition to my politeness and it said, absolutely not. And I'm like, maybe that's a vow. So we go in and we try to elucidate, why is that? So why is the loyalty that you have to that belief system so powerful that no matter how you try, every way, I went to the psychiatrist, I went to the psychologist, I took some drugs, I went to ayahuasca, I did this, and it's still, I can't get what I want. It's because you're so loyal to some belief system that said you're not worthy, or I'm going to make up for that, that you want to honor yourself for being worthy, that you being that loyal to a belief system that you established to make up for something. So it's still self-honoring to do that from my perspective.
Yeah, and that was such an amazing gift that you gave me when you did that, because I remember one of the things that you had also said was, more at the beginning of that reading, and you said, "You have the most elaborate system of stuffing your feelings I've ever seen." And you said, "It's really quite beautiful, but it's I don't get that it's serving you." And then, so we went in and dug into that a bit. And of course, it wasn't serving me because, stuffing your feelings really does. And so, the interesting part of that whole thing was, and for the benefit of the people who haven't seen the book or read it, and I don't know how much I actually even talked about it in the book now that I think about it, but it was a week later that I had this incredible dream. And usually when you dream about your house or whatever, it's it's your house, but it's really not your house. This was my townhouse in Chicago at the time. I literally, on the same night that I had gone to bed to have the dream, I mean, everything was exactly the same. And I remember I had been, my friend Dean was maybe going to stop by after the soccer game in real life. And so when I went to bed, I remember thinking, I'm going to bed early. I hope he doesn't come by because I'm tired. And then I have this dream, and I wake up at 12:10, right after midnight, having had this thing where somebody was knocking at the door. It was raining. And when I got downstairs to open the door, there was this being that just kind of rushed at me. And I wasn't afraid, but it was very bizarre. And the next thing I know, I'm standing on the top steps looking into my living room. And here this being is on the opposite side of the room, right by the porch door that I had left open right before I went to bed, or I'd shut it, but it had been open. And he looks at me and telepathically communicates, very straightforward: "I am that part of you responsible for stuffing your feelings. You can't let me go." And I remember thinking to myself, all right, I need to be creative here. And I looked at him and I said, because I've realized one of the biggest things I get from coaching companies and people and salespeople and whatnot is the power of acknowledgement. So the very first thing I did was acknowledge him. I said, "Thank you." I said, "You were here for me at a time where I really needed you. I appreciate that. I don't need you anymore. It's time for you to go." And I turned around to make it very clear that there was no discussion. That was it. And of course, I've got a few girlfriends in my past who would look back at moments where there was no discussion and be like, "That's part of your problem." But in that case, I knew it was really the right thing to do. And so when I got downstairs, though, it was really wild because I remember I could see his jawline, and he looked like Dick Tracy. And I was never really a comic book reader, but he was in this trench coat and top hat and had that very square jaw. And this little dog led him away. And I remember when I was telling you about this, Therese, we were at one of Jen Weigel's events when she was doing her one-person show, which I love. I'm spiritual, damn it. And I said, the only part of that dream that I don't get is the dog. And I remember the woman who had asked if she could listen in looked at the two of us and said, "Oh, I know what that is." And we were both like, "You do?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "When you said that you were no longer willing to be the host, that it needed to be led away by something, and the dog represents unconditional love." And I remember you just lit up and were like, "Yeah, that's it. That makes sense." But it was the most beautiful thing. And I woke up and I just felt so empowered. And I remember you said even 12:10, the time that I woke up, was meaningful in terms of endings and new beginnings or completions and things like that. And it really was. I mean, that was like, I don't know, the bow tie on the whole thing. That was the moment that I felt like, all right, I'm free. I don't need to deal with that anymore. So
Right.
thank you, because that was super powerful.
My pleasure.
You brought up a lot of, I mean, God, there's a million things I want to talk to you about, but the one thing that I'm really, really intrigued by is how you made the transition from doing, because I know you had an amazing impact on a lot of individuals, but you transitioned into doing this also for companies, which is amazing, because a lot of people would think, sorry, we don't have a tarot card reader at our company. Not that you read cards, but it's not a position you usually see on LinkedIn. So talk to me about how you made that transition and what's been going on with that. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you for asking. And it was actually never a transition because I was in business before I did readings officially. And I always have loved business. For me, business is intellectually breathtaking. I love complex problems. I see a company, which the word corporation means body, and my dissertation was on shepherding the corporation through transformation, and how spirit enters the corporate body and shepherding the corporate soul through transformation. It was about facilitation, because what I did is I really translated what I understood in spirit into change management as a profession and a discipline. I find there's a lot of secret ministers in that field. Like, I bet they all had past lives as ministers at some point, because they really care about the process of transformation. And so I've done that, at AT&T and internally, and there's like, you know, 2,500 people that we were working through, working from being where they were to a whole different direction, and everything it took inside, not only to redesign their organization, but what does it take to buy into that? And I was creating processes for that to happen, for buy-in to happen. But I used a lot of those spiritual disciplines that I'd learned in order to ground myself to become a person who could hold a space while people got afraid. Well, they felt afraid, and they went all the way through the process to owning the next thing. But I would put myself in there as the lightning rod, oh no, here she comes. But like, that was my job. And so it was always about culture, changing the culture, changing it's mindset change, it's consciousness change. And so the way that I see spirit moving in the world is, what does it take to change an individual's consciousness? What does it take to help them, to bring them to a new level of understanding? Well, that's part of what it takes. Is I say I do healing through understanding. And when it comes to a corporation, when I do large scale systems change, or I help a company do that, I really have developed early on. I developed these processes that would bring all the voices to the table that didn't belong at the table at the time, that weren't allowed at the table at the time. I insisted they be at the table because I knew that there was wisdom even when they were considered to be irrelevant voices. I said, no, there's wisdom in those voices. I even created a strategic planning process where people had to do their normal. I put a normal strategic planning process, and then said, now everybody has to anonymously put on paper what they know is true. Like, okay, that's what we say, but what do we really know? And then I mixed them up, and we put them back in and said, okay, we're going to mix max the tables and talk about it. And what do people know about what they know about this? So by the time they were done, it was basically taking all the processes, all the voices in people's unconscious mind, putting them on the table so their conscious mind could see them, talking about it in the big room. And the one comment I got by most of them, they were all men, there was no women. And they all said to me, this is the first time we've been on break and we don't have anything to say to each other, because it's all got said in the room. There was no like, oh, we all know how this is going to go, because that was said in the room. So in the same way, when I'm reading an individual, I'm taking all the voices that let's say we're in a particular state, we're ignoring that voice. We don't want to talk about that voice. That voice isn't aware. And I'm bringing all those voices to your table and saying, let's look at those, so that you can decide if that's still the way that you want to proceed in organizing your reality this way. But now you have agency, because you know the voices are there. So you heal through understanding. If I know that hidden voice has really got the power, it's the same thing in an organization. That if you look at the org chart, or you look at any part of that design of the organization, that there are people that look like they're in power by position power, then there's people who have political power. And they're not listed on the org chart. And you won't be able to find them unless you understand the culture of the organization and the values of it and how it works. So I also used to take things like, I'd take some executives in a big company, put them together and say, okay, tell me what the most important decisions you've made in the last 3 weeks. And then they would say, okay, and they decide, and I go, okay, what values did you use to make those decisions? And they'd be like horrified, like, wait, we didn't know there'd be a test. And I'm like, okay, you were the ones that created the value system that you're now using in order to make these decisions. And guess what? You actually did use values to make those decisions. You're just not aware of it. So it wasn't about getting it right. It was about you grow in the direction you most persistently ask questions about. So if you persistently ask, what values did you use in order to make these decisions? It brings your consciousness to the place of asking that question, so that you're constantly aware that you're growing in the direction of prioritizing values and decision making. So those are some of the ways that those are, you might call them ethical, moral, spiritual, but those are the most important things to us, what we value, and how do we operationalize that in a company with decision making and with design and with culture building. And that's why I started a conscious business network in 2008 in Chicago, to bring together feisty leading edge thinkers to stimulate our business imagination about what's possible in this new economy that includes, people, place, people, planet, and profit. And so, I started that right before conscious capitalism came. So we all were on the same wavelength there. But I thought, you know what, there are people that understand that the values that you bring to the table in companies will create the richness of the experience and the meaning of the community such that they create rich outcomes, versus people who feel that they're just doing a job. They're disconnected from meaning and from the way they make a difference. And eventually they just keep leaving, and it's a revolving door of talent. And in this day and age, you just can't afford to believe that you have a talent pipeline just because you have a business. And even if the business is interesting, you have to know that this millennial generation, which is the largest consumer group in history as of 2016, is very values driven. And they're not tolerating a company that doesn't feel the responsibility for their constituents and whether it's their supply chain or the companies that they're distributing their in, or where their products are made, that they want to know that there's a consideration of people as a valued and most valued asset in the creation of the outcome. Yeah. So that's change management is really how I translated that. But I also do readings for leaders and help them to understand what their soul is asking for and how it wants to step up and what wants to happen so that they can operationalize that in their business. And then I help them understand what that means in their business in terms of their decision making.
I love that because I've seen a number of CEOs and executives over the years who have pointed to intuition and said, "Don't discount it. It's really important." We've all had a gut instinct that we wished we had and didn't, or that we wished we'd followed and didn't. So talk to me about. I'm really curious which business leaders are most likely to be open to intuition, in their roles and their companies.
Well, the movement towards conscious capitalism now is much more robust than it was when I started it in 2008. And I was bringing in these leading edge thinkers. And now we have conscious capitalism. And it was actually before the pandemic that I brought together all of the organizations in Chicago that thought that identified with being a conscious organization, conscious entrepreneurs, social alliances. They all said, we are all about conscious business. And I did a conscious business palooza just to see what was there and where we were at. And quite frankly, it was it was disparate. I had hoped it would be farther along, but now it is. So there's these organizations that any B Corp, any benefit corporation, anybody who is, and if you look at the statistics now, it'll show you, the research will show you that when you're a conscious company, you do have better results on the NASDAQ. So people are finally understanding that the way they treat their people has everything to do with the quality of the outcome, and that makes a difference. And so it's not just gee, I hope you're intuitive. It's more like, are you kidding me? If you can't figure out that, this whole operation needs to be based just not on data. Well, let me go back. Given that, data can only go so far in giving us a conclusion that's best for the organization. And then there's elements that are uncontrollable. Intuition fills that gap. I wrote an article for LinkedIn on AI, artificial intelligence and AI, advanced intuitive intelligence, and how for example, when I'm working with, let's say, a leader who's trying to look for a top candidate, and they give me a name, and I see another, and I see the name of the position and the name of the company, and I look at it together. In this case, a CEO did this. That's typically how I will do it. And I might say to somebody, who I did say in this one organization, it was a $25 million company. And I was looking at it and I was saying, there's something going on here that's hidden on the field. It's personal to this person, and it will impact the value of the company. Well, you put the AI algorithm together with the research they did on this as a viable venture capital partner, or a venture partner, and it was all about yes. Like, here's all of the connections that AI would say with their algorithm fit, 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 fit. And I was like, nope. And I said, that's something that's hidden on the field and it will impact it. And so they decided not to go with that. And they found out just a little bit later that leader had some very grave illness. They were trying to sell the company before everyone found out. But without that person's talent in the company, it probably wouldn't have done as well because they had the founder and all the energy in it. So those are the sort of things that, and they even said, what was it? And I said, I have an ethic with what I do. I won't look at someone else's energy that hasn't asked me to do that, but I will say there's an impact on your outcome that you're asking me about. And another CEO that told me that with these candidates he was looking at, and he said, this one is the one everyone agrees. And AI would say, the algorithm would say, absolutely is the right candidate. And I keep thinking, no, it's that guy. And so he decided to go with his gut and found out 3 months later that the perfect candidate had something happen to his family in another country that he had to move out and serve, and he wouldn't be back for years. So he wouldn't have been able to fill the position. So these are things that AI will never be able to, capitalize on, and that intuition is absolutely necessary, so that we need both. We need a team that can do AI and AII, and that they can be trusting their intuition so that the outcomes are more informed. As they say with the Challenger, there was one engineer who said, they were about to launch and they got together and they said, let's go. Is everybody going? And this guy was starting to go and say, I don't think so. And his boss went like this, like, don't say anything. We got all this invested in it. We need it to go. And there's one engineer that was like, don't go. It's not good. It's not going to work out. But his boss told him to say nothing. And then the Challenger blew up. Every voice in the table is important. Every voice on the table is important. We've got this whole thing. We've invested all of it. We're ready to go. Don't say that. One person's intuition is like, it's not going to work out. You listen to that and then you research it. It's not just like I had a CEO I was working with, planning to partner with a company. And when I looked at the connection between them, I said, there is one aspect of this company that is under-resourced. And when you connect it with your company, it will cost you a lot of money because you're counting on that. And it's not obvious on paper that that's not well-resourced. I said, go study that. So they did, and they found out that this used to be well-resourced, but they ended up, that person left that was the head of it, and they had reallocated the resources. Instead of investing in that area of the business, they invested in something else. So if they had gotten together, that would have been under-resourced. It would have cost them, they said, about $300,000 just in the recapitulation of trying to put that back together. So these are the things that intuition can do if they're advanced, if you're advanced intuitive, and AI cannot. So I think it's really important for every leader to understand this is a business, this is a basic literacy for leaders, is to honor their intuition and honor the intuition of their folks and to support it. So I never think of it as who's in, who's out, like who likes intuition, who doesn't. I think, well, who's a 21st century leader and who doesn't get it? So that's kind of how I think of it, because I don't think companies can survive without honoring the information that comes through that channel. That they're not going to survive with
So,
the innovation there.
wow, there's so many different downstream potential impacts of that. One of the ones that occurs to me is, okay, so if let's say you're coaching an executive who's transitioning into another company, how would you advise her or him to interview them to make sure that they are in fact open to the intuitive aspects?
It's a really interesting question. I think the question is how, think of decisions that you've made in your life that you're proud of, or think of decisions that have been a real challenge, and when you, how did you make them and what was the outcome? And if you listen to the ones that were most important to them, and none of them come up with, I trusted my gut, or I had a feeling, or I saw an idea, whatever, then that person might be much more oriented towards data. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't be the best person for that team, because some of these teams, what we need is a diversity. So we need people who are data driven. We need people who are intuitively driven. And we hope that everybody honors all of that. the intuitive has to honor the data-driven guy. The data-driven guy has to honor the intuitive guy, even if they don't have it in abundance, because we need the diversity in order to come up with the richest information that helps the best outcome.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, it's such an important thing because I find over and over again, because I've done a lot of work with people in transition, and they're almost afraid to ask the questions that they need to ask, which is why it's so important that, when you're bringing up, the conscious business and the intuitive aspects of things. I can appreciate that for some people that's a lot further out of their comfort zone than the typical questions that they don't ask that they should be asking.
Yeah, that's true. I think in this market, though, every generation evolves in the way that their brain can perceive and process. So we have children now who we call of whom we call neurodiverse, that are extremely well versed in the intuitive aspects and have maybe savant abilities in some areas, and in other areas are perhaps socially, for example, low on that intelligence. But when we think about the kind of global complex problems we have, and the last time that the leaders met in Davos, where they bring the best and brightest, the heads of countries, the heads of hedge funds, and what are they investing in? And they ask the questions of billionaires, what are you investing in? This is the first year where people, after they said the three most important things that will change our future is climate change, AI, and geopolitical events. And based on those, their answer was, what's the most important thing to invest in? Their answer was, I don't know. And so if the best and brightest people in the world go, I don't know, then you don't feel badly that you don't know, because it's not obvious anymore. And that's why intuition is even so much more important, because if you can't rely on external data or predictions from the past to extrapolate into the future, you've got to go inside and you've got to find a wisdom that can give you information that you will then can go data research, but and make it even richer. But you've got to be able to rely on that source to find some wisdom and some answers.
I love it. So I definitely want to go down the children path and the neurodivergent area. I do want to ask though. This question keeps coming up in my mind. What are you most proud of, or what were you most surprised by in terms of your work with companies and executives and intuition?
Isn't that interesting? I don't think I've ever been asked that question. Um, what surprised me? Um, what was the other part of that question? What surprised me, and what might
What
have
either surprised you, or what were you particularly proud of?
particularly proud of? I think I have been most proud of the times when I could demonstrate this value I teach in all my classes, which is the most important quality that will enhance your intuitive capacity is staying. And I think staying is a quality, it's a verb, and it's a absolute necessity, because when you're sitting at the feet of something that you don't know, of the unknown, the only way you know it is to stay. That's why relationships, when you stay, often get deeper. If they're not, destructive, they can go deeper in terms of learning. It might be hard, there's a challenge because it's unknown and it's uncomfortable. But if you stay, sometimes what's unknown becomes known, and then you can move forward with it. And so when there was, for example, large scale change and people were aiming it all at me, what's wrong with my design? I I have to go into a very grounded position of evoking more and saying, yeah, if that design were given to me, I'd be really mad. I'd be mad as hell. How many other people are mad? Instead of going, well, you know what? I guess it was a bad design, or maybe I should have done it differently, or how do you feel? I was just like, who else is mad? And stay there to so that their emotions can become data, and that they can honor them and I can honor them and see them and not criticize them. And then they get it all out. And we look at that, and then I wait. And then I have to have the discipline not to defend, not to protect, not to evoke, not to move forward, but just to stay. And then I wait. And then until somebody says, well, people are counting on us as a little team here, and we've got to produce something. And then they have this conversation with themselves about whether or not this is a point where they opt out or they go deeper. And I cannot interfere with that because that's their decision, but they don't know that that's a actual discipline on my part. And then when I come back on the scene, I say something like, "So where are we?" And they'll go, "Oh, you're still here." And that's a compliment to me because it means that they have figured this out themselves. And that's my objective of the exercise. In the same way, sometimes over the last 3 decades, I might look at someone's energy field and have absolutely no clue what's going on. And to be able to trust myself, to be able to be able to discern it, I have to stay in what's uncomfortable, what I don't know. Ask, why is that happening? Ask, what is it? Move my lens back. Be patient, and then it reveals itself. So I find staying is the most important part, and that's what I'm most proud of because I'm not a stayer. You can tell by my energy, like staying is not one of my qualities that I came in with to cultivate that with hard discipline. I'm ready to move on, but like stay. So I think that would be my response.
That's great. I love that. So, all right, let's go to the neurodivergent thing, because and let's first define that in terms of your role and what you've done in that space.
A lot of this information came to me because I've been doing readings for executives for, like I say, 3 decades. And when sometimes what they're concerned about are their children. So I've said to them, give me your children's names. And then I started to look at the energy field of children, and I started to see a lot of interesting things. Sometimes I look at their brain and how it's firing and misfiring. And sometimes I'll say, this doesn't work. Why is this part of their brain quiet and this part looks like a storm? And I said, something's dissonant about this. And they'll say, oh, they're on these drugs. And I go, oh, that makes sense. Give me the name of the drug. Then I look at the impact of the drug on the child and what it's doing and how it's connecting to their field, and what it's supporting and what it's preventing and its side effects. And I can see what's happening energetically. And so I literally listen to what the drugs are. I take them off the field so I can actually see what the child's map of reality is without all the impacts of those medications. And then I can see that so many of them have, I think of everything in systems terms. In business, you is a change management professional, you have to look at things in terms of the system. So there's stimuli, then there's receptor sites. We call them eyes, ears, nose, mouth. Then we have capacity in our brain to understand what that is, and we process it. We have processing capacity. And then we have an output, which is called expression. Well, what's happening is that, one, we have more stimuli than we've ever had in history, ever. Uh, I mean, we have 5G towers, 3G towers, we have microwaves, we have 5,000 things in space beaming down on us. We have video games. We have all of these things that are also, and multiverses and altered reality, everything, augmented reality, everything. And the kids are being born into the stimuli that no human brain has ever had to process in history. So they also, though, have developed their receptor sites. So not only are they seeing all of this or hearing all of this, but they're intuitively looking at it. And sometimes when you look, so I help people to learn how to have agency with their intuition or their receptor sites, which some use the chakra map as a way to describe that. So let's say the third eye. When kids are diagnosed with like ADHD, they're hyperactive, and there are problems in school, I can see that their third eye is wide open. And when your third eye is wide open, you can see multidimensional reality simultaneously. Everything is urgent, and there is no sequence because they're looking at it through an image. So if I gave you a picture and I said, what's the most important thing here, and put everything in order, you couldn't do it. It's a picture. It doesn't make sense. And when you're looking through the third eye tells the truth and neutrality through images. And so they're looking at the image in multidimensional realities, and everything is urgent. So for example, I talked to a guy who was a head of a school in Canada, and he was the assistant principal. And when kids would act out, they'd come to him. So this kid was acting out a lot. Finally, the teacher sent the kid to this assistant principal, and he said, "Hey, what's really going on?" And he trusted him. And he said, "I'm really upset about what's going on in China. There's all of these fightings," and he started describing it. And the teacher was looking at him like, he said this was residential school. They had no internet. They had no newspapers. They had nothing that this child could be talking about. He said, "Where are you getting this information?" He goes, "I just know it." So he said he looked himself on the internet and found, as he was describing it, it was going on in China, what he was describing. But the child only knew because he was tuning in to this in another location. And then another child came to him, and this teacher was angry because the child wasn't paying attention. And he said, "Why aren't you paying attention?" And he said, "Well, because of that brown spot on the teacher's lung. It's on the left side, and it really bothers me. Every time I look at him, I see this brown spot." And so the teacher went to the principal went to the teacher and said, "He's seen a brown spot on your lung." He goes, "I'm fine. I got nothing going on." He goes, "Why don't you get it checked out anyway?" And he did, and found out it was the beginning of lung cancer for him. So not only was the child paying attention, but the child was paying attention in a way the teacher couldn't possibly pay attention, because the teacher didn't have that capacity. So the receptor sites of and the capacity to perceive all of the things going on that are multiplying in our actual three-dimensional reality, then being able to see interdimensional reality. You can imagine that when you're young and you don't have your cerebral cortex doesn't get developed until you're in your 20s, early 20s, to be able to sort through what you're looking at. You can do it primitively, but you're not looking at impacts and all of that stuff. You're not doing the analysis of that until you're later. So now you've got all this information coming in, multidimensional realities. You're getting all of this information is coming in the way that we're telling kids they have to do things online and everything now, and then they get to do it. And then they have this capacity issue. They can't process all that. They can't sort through it. So their expression looks hyperactive or not paying attention, or, we have all these labels that our smaller minds are making judgments about, because we can't see the source and the processing that goes before the output. And so then we drug it because it's not normal, and we try to help that person be normal. What we could do instead is say, how about we understand that this is a development process? You have agency about your receptor sites. You can close them down. How can you do that? Let's try it out. What if we had developmental pathways that the students then began to understand they have agency for what they accept in, what's there, how it works, and what they can do about it, so that they can practice that, enjoy their gifts, and contribute that in a way that's meant for these, very complex challenges globally to be addressed, because these capacities will be needed in a digital form that they have, but they must be cultivated, understood, and supported, so that they'll be ready and not just die from cutting themselves or killing themselves because they don't fit in to this smaller paradigm that everyone thinks they ought to be looking like. So that's what I see when I look energetically at children.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, because one of the things that has occurred to me over the years, and I've heard different people talk about it, is that when you are aware, at a more intuitive, spiritual sort of level, that what often comes to the forefront are the negative things. The issues in China, the lung, and I love your point about filtering, because if you can, it's not that you don't want to be aware of that necessarily. It's good to, awareness is great, but you've got to be able to figure it out. If we're getting bombarded by hundreds of thousands of stimuli at any given moment, sorting through and figuring it out, it would be totally overwhelming if you were just bombarded by things that, when the heavier among them, I mean, if you think about it, they're always going to be negative. It's not, and I don't mean that coming from a glass is half full sort of standpoint, but I will sometimes do an exercise in class and say, imagine the best thing that could ever possibly happen to you. And then, and obviously you don't have to share with a neighbor, but just, it doesn't have to be family friendly. Just think about it. And then I'll say, okay, give me, imagine for a moment the worst, most devastating thing that could ever happen. And if you put the two of them on a scale side by side, the negative one is always going to outweigh the positive one. It's just, I don't know if it's a design flaw in our brain or what, but it doesn't surprise me that these kids who are very open are picking up on, I think there's a lot of positive and negative energy in the world, but it doesn't shock me that they're picking up the negative things, which is I also, I mean, it could be wrong, and I'd love for your perspective on it. But like, I think about, when people have premonitions and things like that, and you hear all the stories about people who didn't get on the Titanic or didn't get on the plane that was going to crash. It's
Yeah.
because a lot of those things that they're picking up on are more, you know, well, negative is a value judgment. I get that, but they're heavier in nature. It seems to me anyway.
Yeah, and really those things that I didn't get on the Titanic or didn't 9/11 didn't go there. Your intuition is built for two reasons. One is to keep you safe on your journey, and the other is to support your creative purpose. And so whenever you hear don't get on that plane or you see oh those crashed, I better not do it. It's your intuition keeping you safe because it's not your time. If you agreed to that time, then you might not hear that, and because it's your time and you agreed to go now. But let's say that so the other part is your creative purpose, where you're always attracting things that will enhance the information that you get about what can move you towards that purpose or get you more enhanced in learning about it. But because we have created a culture, because I'm an expert in culture, my issue is that we have created a morphogenic field. Rupert Sheldrake was a winning biologist who talked about how when you do things over and over again, they create an energy in that space. He was basing his conclusions on the work of McDougall, who was a Harvard scientist who was looking at putting rats in a maze, and they always went to the dark. And so then he would electrify those rats until they would go into the light. So if they went into the dark, they get electrified, so they would go into the light. And by the 11th generation, maybe it was mice and not rats, mice, they went into the light without provocation. So so Rupert Sheldrake called it a field, a morphofield. You're creating this environment that has this influence. So when you go to a church, you have this desire to kind of go inward. And when you go to build a church, you'll find sometimes they find when they're going to go build a church, if they do an archaeological dig, there was a temple under there in some BC, because the energy field goes up and it has influence, right, on what's being built there or what you feel when you go there. That's why so many people will go someplace. I go, I feel so different here, right? They feel the energy field that's influencing them. What we've created is an influence of violence and a bias towards just desensitization in our global culture, particularly in the West. Let's everybody carry a gun. Let's look at video games that are all about blowing people up. Let's look at blood and guts and gore and saying, oh, well, that's normal. Let's say, oh, well, those people died. So that there is a culture that has nothing to do with the ease and flow and grace of love. It has to do with, I'm scared, I'm going to show up bigger than you, and I'm going to shoot you because I'm scared of you, but you're scared of me, and now I'm going to show you I'm better than you. And I'm so this whole culture has inundated children with the idea that unless they show up a certain way, they're not good enough. And by the way, take a gun with you in case you don't like how he shows up, so that you can find your way in the world. And unfortunately, no matter where you go, that culture is reinforced in movies and videos and every it's very hard. I went into before there were so many internet. I went into a video store. I said, "Can I?" My daughter was young, and I said, "I'd like some video that you have here that has no like explicit sex and no violence." And the guy just looked at me and he goes, "Oh." He looks around. He goes, "I don't think we have any of those." The entire store. I don't think we have any of those. What are we teaching our children? And that was 10 years ago. So imagine how much more multiplied. So when children are attuned to the quote unquote negative, they're actually just attuned to the morpho field that we created for them and told them that this is real and this is true. It's real. You should be afraid of life. And what did Einstein said? The most important question you can ask, is the universe a friendly place? Is the world a friendly place? And if it's not, you spend your whole life dealing with the defenses. And if it is, you get to create, because when you feel safe, you get to create. These children can't create because they don't feel safe. And 10 years old to 20, the one of the leading causes of death is suicide. 10 years old on. And I've dealt with I'm a medium, so I've looked at energy of people who have died, whether they're children or whether a 16-year-old who hung herself in I've looked at the energy of those on the other side, and who have died by drugs, who have died by this or that, and looking at the lessons. But the bottom line is that we're all universally responsible for either putting out a vibration that resembles something higher than, you know, fun and, you know, higher than anger, sadness, or fear, and putting out something that's closer to love. That doesn't mean we dishonor our anger, sadness, or fear. It means we honor those and we move on, and we don't soak in them and find reasons to stay there. So that's the difference between how we teach, you know, our children. So I think that's why they're tuning into that. If we go to another country
Interesting.
where they're not, and I wonder if in New Zealand the children would behave that way, would tune in that way, because they have a much more closed, the culture is smaller and they can have more control over that. And they were the ones that bought guns from everyone. As soon as somebody was shot once, they took and bought all the guns from the citizens who gave them and got them money. So they have solutions. I wonder what it would be interesting to find out. A little research study on that would be interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say we'd love to get you a grant or something so you can go do that, and or even some of the, you know, the I think about some of the like Aboriginal type tribes where they don't have competition. You know, the idea of competing against each other just doesn't even exist. You know, and it would be so fascinating to see how they would respond to something like that too. I love that. I want to be respectful of your time. This has been amazing. I mean, I could talk to you and listen to you for hours. What other things should people know about you, and how can they reach you?
Well, thank you for asking. My website is really my name, Therese Rowley, ThereseRowley.com, or acceleratedalignment.com will get you there as well. And I work with people one-on-one, especially conscious people. I work with conscious parents. I work with conscious leaders in business, and I work with helping them to create cultures that bring forward the gifts of those around them. I also teach classes in this thing. I give workshops. A lot of those are customized. So I do all of those things, and that's the best way to get a hold of me. You can also email me at drtrowley@gmail or assistrowley@gmail.com.
All right. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I love it. It's such a gift to get to talk to you, and especially to, you know, acknowledge you publicly for the impact that you've had in my life, which has been significant. And so I'm deeply grateful.
Right back at you, Robin. Congratulations on your book and all your success. Thank you again for allowing me to be on the show, on the
Oh, it
podcast.
was a pleasure. We'll do it again. I would love it.
Me too. Thank you.
All right. We've got other interviews coming up. So if you like what you heard, like I said, I can't tell you how grateful I am that Therese spent time with us today, because she's amazing. And if your intuition tells you to contact her, I would encourage you to follow that, because I promise you it's absolutely worthwhile. Uh, Definitely. Also, if things, you know, resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe. It's free to do. We'll be doing more shows on A Trek Within, some really interesting interviews coming up, and just you know, always also open to any feedback that people have, any questions, because we'll collect questions. If people have enough questions about particular guests I've had on, we'll bring them back and we'll address some of those questions, and just do, you know, fun, creative things, whatever the spirit moves us to do. So in the meantime, follow your intuition, follow that inner voice, trust that inner guidance, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
It's all about trying to make ends meet.